Thank you, Andrew. Welcome, everyone, to the Automate DR Testing with Zerto and OO. First thing I'd like to do is let's see that we have a way to raise our hands on the HP My Room. If you would, raise your hand if you've heard of Zerto. All right, 2 so far. Just give you a couple seconds. And the reason why I'm doing this is I want to get some gauge of who's the OO experts and who's the DR fans here. So it looks like we had about 6 out of the audience that knew something about Zerto. So, Andre, we were right. We're going to tilt this a little bit more toward what is Zerto, and then we're going to show you the integration with OO and how such a powerful combination you could make for data center DR and also for migrations and all kinds of things you can imagine when you can fully automate things. So hopefully everyone's seeing my screen now, and let me know if you can.
I can certainly see.
Good. Great. So I'm going to switch to the slides. So let's talk a little bit about who I am first. I'm Shannon Snowden. I'm a senior architect at Zerto, and my Twitter is Shannon Snowden, and then my email is there. So if you've got any questions, just shoot me an email or shoot me a tweet, and I'll get back to you. Today's agenda is, and I'm going to touch very lightly on what is OO because I'm sure I'm in the audience, probably the one that knows the least about OO, but I've had the pleasure of learning about it while putting together this Zerto content package. And it's a very powerful tool, as everyone here knows. And now what I want to do is introduce you who Zerto is and why this is such a transformative combination. All right, so what is OO? As we all know, it's a powerful IT operations automation tool. I was at Discover in December in London, and they had this some booze about composable infrastructure. And I think this really hits at the heart of what OO can do and what Zerto can do for you as far as being able to move workloads around at your pleasure, as opposed to worrying about what's underneath. So with the combination of OO and Zerto, imagine this. You could completely automate disaster recovery testing. So as any of us that have been involved in IT know, that DR testing is the ugly stepchild that no one wants to play with. It's done on the weekends. It's done with equipment normally or processes normally that you know absolutely are changing. They're not the same. So being able to automate that and to be able to just get an email that it's finished is a very powerful change in the culture of operations. And as I get into more of it, I'll share a little bit more about what some of our Zerto customers experience with being able to not just check a box for DR, but being able to know that it works. They know that their recovery points and recovery time objectives are indeed being met because they can proactively test them. Now, we're very proud that Zerto is a Go partner with HPE, and we worked very hard to hit the HPE Discover in London to have our first content package for OO. So let's talk a little bit more about Zerto. Now, I'm going to, like I said, tilt this a little bit more towards Zerto for a few minutes, and then we're going to get into the actual demo, looking at what we do, and then how it interacts and works with OO, to where you get some takeaways here of, I could maybe fully orchestrate an entire event, like a DR event or a migration event. I think what normally happens with our customers is you see the power of what we do, and then you go, oh, wow, I could do it with this. Or I could, in fact, some of our customers change their business processes. So what's Zerto? We're an enterprise class replication and recovery orchestration product for VMware, Hyper-V, AWS. So we're on the virtualization side, and that's what we specialize in. To take a little bit of a step back, when Zerto was introduced in 2011, it was just a few months before the VMworld and Zerto won Best of Show at VMworld, just a couple months after it was released. And as we see from that growth, if you look at our customers, we've got over 2,000 customers now. And here's the important point for a lot of you listening here, is 200 plus cloud service providers. Now, this should be some indication to you that we can work at very large, very need for automation levels with customers such as cloud service providers that demand it. And so we're going to talk about our architecture, and I'm going to show it to you, and how and why a cloud service provider or a large enterprise, which is going to be the OO target, very large environments. Why am I automating things? The user story is going to be very, very similar to you as well for those cloud service providers or very large enterprises. And we've got a rich channel partner ecosystem as well. So here's just a few bullets before I get into the architecture, just to put it in mind of what we do. We're disaster recovery software, but we also do migrations. And because, let's face it, if the infrastructure is prepared for DR, a migration is just a scheduled downtime. So we're hypervisor based, which means we're VMware, Hyper-V. You can go cross hypervisor as well. And we do both on-premise, so if you want to keep it all internal, site to site, or if you want to leverage some DR as a service with over 200 cloud service providers, you can do whatever combination works for you. We're completely storage and hypervisor agnostic. So we're hardware agnostic. We're a software only solution. So we see often completely dissimilar hardware in the source data center and the target data center. And as you with orchestration know, the more variables that we have, the more work we have to do to automate things and to orchestrate things. And what Zerto will allow you to do is you can look at your entire virtual infrastructure and go, okay, I don't have to worry about that. I can use the content pack in OO. And as we bring more content packs and make them available, our goal is to completely orchestrate the life cycle of a disaster recovery, which means the protection of virtual machines, the testing, and the creation of them, and moving them around. Okay, so an important distinction with Zerto is we don't do snapshots. We're doing continuous data replication, and I'll talk a lot more about that in a second. We also allow you to rewind via our journal-based protection. You can go back up to 14 days point in time, and the increment's going to be every few seconds. So imagine this: if you're in a situation like a crypto locker, and you're trying to recover an entire data center or a whole group of applications, Zerto gives you the ability to roll back before it happened, and we orchestrate the complete thing as far as booting, re-IP addressing, and everything. So we're a great complement to OO in taking that piece of the virtualization layer and just making it happen. And it can be put into a nice combination of orchestrating all the physical servers, the network settings, all the other things that you have to do. Now, one thing we're going to talk about here is the test feature. The test, well, we're going to automate that piece, and that's what I'm going to show you today. We have really detailed recovery reports, because keep in mind, with all those cloud service providers and large enterprises, they have to prove to auditors and they have to prove to the application owners that this thing actually works, and we've actually tested it and it can come back. Something unique about Zerto is we install in minutes. A typical installation for Zerto is 30 minutes, and that's up, running, and protecting VMs. And I'm about to show you the architecture and how that's possible. Now, let's look at this from a global perspective for a second, as far as we at Zerto don't know what your data center looks like. We have no idea what your layout is. We have no idea what combination of acquisitions or mergers or whatever may happen to you. But what we do is we accommodate it. So that's why we're multiple platforms supporting, hardware agnostic, and we're able to pair sites in what you're seeing on the screen. So if you've got some combination to get your data protected or to move, then we support it. It's very, very straightforward as far as I want to protect these virtual machines and I want them to go from my on-premise to a cloud or maybe a bunch of remote sites to a central site. And we allow you to do that. So anytime you can lay anyone working with OO or any kind of IT management operations, anytime you can streamline a process, that's a good thing. So you're not having to think through all of the nuances that Zerto will take care of in your OO construction. So you can put together a workflow that you just plug in the Zerto piece and it takes care of a lot of things underneath. That way you're worried about physical switches, network settings, firewalls, physical servers, things that Zerto is not going to do. So here's where we are. We took the replication out of the storage level. We've pushed it up into hypervisor. So all of that work is happening above storage, which makes us hardware agnostic, which gives us the ability to do this. We can go across any platform that's Hyper-V, VMware. We support AWS. We support going to cloud service providers as well. So let's get into how it works. Here's the architecture, and then we're going to get into demo. And hopefully you'll start seeing some things that may provide great benefit to you. So the first thing we do is the installation. I mentioned it was 30 minutes, so here's what it looks like. The gray and the light colors are your infrastructure. So you got a production site, you got a recovery site, and you got a connection between them. And Zerto is the red pieces. So at the top there, we've got a ZVM, the top left inside the production site. It's paired to the vCenter. So the ZVM is a Windows Server service. So it installs with an MSI installer. It's 5-minute install. I tell it who the vCenter is, and it's up and going. Once that happens, then I deploy the virtual replication appliances. And I put one per host, and that VRA running on the host is responsible for all the replication that happens bidirectionally. We support bidirectional replication on that host. So here's the flow. As we see these arrows flying around, here's a VM writing through the hypervisor to storage. And as the write commit happens, the VRA replicates it to the remote site. At the remote site, we have a journal. That's that up to 14-day point in time journal. And I can roll back at any one of those points in time. Now, for scale, if I need to scale out this environment, right now I'm showing you on the production site, there's 2 hosts. There's multiple storage volumes. It could be any kind of storage. So let's build it out a little bit more. It could be any kind of storage. And so it doesn't matter to Zerto. It could be a combination of whatever you have at the source or the target site, and we support it. Now, once we're doing the replication, then if you need to scale, then as you add hosts to your cluster, you simply add more VRAs, and we scale out with you. And that's very much proven by the fact of, and I call attention to our cloud service providers because they're kind of like racing does to cars. They're stressing it. They're putting a lot of stress on it, and it shows that they put a lot of workloads on it, and they scale out their production sites, and Zerto supports it, and very, very well, I might add. Now, at the target site, we see there's a point there we have no snapshots. So what you see in our recovery point objectives, and so remember the recovery point objective in DR is just the amount of data I'm willing to lose. And with snapshots, there's an inherent issue with how much data you lose, and I'll get into that in just a second. But Zerto does continuous streaming, you can think of it that way, from the source side to the target side. So our RPOs, the recovery point objectives, are measured in the seconds. It's not unusual at all to see production RPOs, 9 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. That's not unusual at all. In fact, when you construct a virtual protection group, which I'll talk about in a second, the default alert you start getting at 5 minutes that it's not meeting your SLAs. So that's how aggressive we are. Let's see, what was that noise? Can everyone still hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I just got this chime. I don't know if anybody else heard it. I didn't know if that meant I dropped or someone dropped. So sorry about the interruption there. Just making sure everybody can still hear me. Okay, so we also support the cross hypervisor as we so they're in the lower right. So let's look at it built out, because I wanted to show you this just to give you to put in mind of how complex your infrastructure can be, yet how simple Zerto stays. And so if the customer sites on the left there should look familiar to you. It's the exact same architecture as the slide before. And from a cloud service provider on the right-hand side, I've got multiple sites, and I'm able to manage it with Zerto just the same. We're still the red pieces. They have all the gray pieces. And the only thing you add on top of what you would have in a normal infrastructure with Zerto is, as a cloud provider or a large enterprise, we add in a layer of management called Zerto Cloud Manager, which allows for multiple ZVMs to be managed, also multiple customers. And that's kind of it. So we're multi-tenant capable as well. All right. So here's the construction. Yes.
I think those beeps are questions down on the comments line.
Okay. So that's a good point. So what I'll do is I want to cover a couple more slides. We'll hit questions, then we'll do the demo, and that way we'll have it all in sort of groups. But I'll get to all your questions. Thank you for the questions coming. I'm looking forward to them. So I've shown you the architecture and how easy it is to put together. So now there's a couple of more critical components, and for you to fully understand what Zerto's doing for you. So regardless of what volume or host the virtual machines are, what we look at from a Zerto perspective is we just want to protect them. So if you've got things moving around underneath as far as like SV motion or an HA event or vMotion, it shouldn't really matter to your DR solution if you've done it correctly. Because here's a problem with storage-based replication that Zerto frees you from. I have built my production site for production. It's for performance. I've got it tuned. I've got flash storage. I've got all kinds of things lined up to where things are going to run the most efficiently. Now, with a DR solution that factors in storage-based replication, then I now have to factor in my replication for DR into a metric, into my production performance tuning, which that has an impact. So what Zerto does is it frees you from that. So what we have is a logical grouping of alike VMs, which we call a virtual protection group. So the virtual protection group, as we see in the lower right-hand side, is that logical collection of VMs that may be for a service or for an application that I need to fail over together to recover together. Now, this is key because this is what we're going to automate. So I'm going to automate with OO testing this. The virtual protection groups will be existing, and then what I want to do is on a schedule to meet SLA, automate it with OO. And that's what I'm going to show you. So I put my apps together, and then I put them in protection groups. I may need 4 or 5 VMs to make that happen. I want them to boot in a certain order. Now, if you recall, I mentioned that we have a 14-day point in time journal. So if I need to go back 10 days ago at noon, I need all of those virtual machines that are in that virtual protection group to come back at the same time, consistent with each other. And that's what we call right order fidelity in those virtual protection groups. So there's things going on between the VMs that are grouped together in a VPG that will help you and will make the failover and the testing and everything much more successful because we're taking care of a lot of that complex relationships between those VMs to make sure that all of them come up and that all the data is consistent with each other and they wake up on time. Okay, so from a testing standpoint, one of the greatest things, along with all this other cool stuff of being software only, agnostic to hardware, virtual protection groups, is the testing. Zerto allows for completely non-disruptive to production testing. That's a very important thing for you. So when you're doing automated orchestration with OO of failover testing, you can literally set it on a schedule in the middle of Monday morning at 10 a.m. and nobody's going to know it because it has zero impact to production, and it allows you to get application owners that own those things that you need to test, or you need to have them verify for migration or testing. You can do it in the middle of the day instead of asking them to come in on the weekends or a night. Everybody's missing out something on the weekends to do DR test or migration testing. So think of this in both ways because it's the same testing you'll be doing. So I'm going to show you how to do the failover testing. Here's what the runbook looks like. So after you're done, this is the very detailed report. It gives you everything. We have customers that have to meet one of these regulations on the right-hand side. They have now got their auditors to just ask for the Zerto report. And this gives them exactly what they need because it's granular. It's very granular if you look at the details of this thing. It's talking about what VM failed over, how long it took, whether it was successful or not. Everything is taken care of. So here's a little peek at our interface that we'll be seeing here in just a second. And the reason why we bring it into here is that because we are simplifying things as far as across multiple platforms, and we're adding more platforms as we go. We'll add more public cloud, we'll add more hypervisors. So this is what you're going to be using. This interface goes across all those platforms, and the functionality and the features and everything are the same. So you as someone having to get the VMs protected, eventually, and I'll talk a little bit more about the packages that are coming, this will all be done through OO as well. So you wouldn't even have to see this pretty interface unless you just want to do some reporting and things. But our goal is this is ease of use. But with OO, we'll be able to make it a very repeatable ease of use because we have a robust set of APIs. And we're starting to put those into the content packages and just to make things much easier. So it gets you out of this this whole cycle. What Zerto does is it gets you much, much closer to reality as far as this happened a few minutes ago. I need to fail it over. I need it back up. We have customers that actually use Zerto and fail over their entire data center, all those virtual machines in 30 minutes. So it gets you out of waiting for queues, restoring from backups, or waiting for a SAN replication to happen, or orchestrating or scripting or using a competitive product to do the orchestration of the SAN. It's just not necessary. So here's what we like to show, and this sometimes drives it home a little bit more. So a backup, you may have up to 24 hours of missing data if one of these things happen. If you're using storage-based replication, it could be 4 hours. And that's a major thing if you can't get 4 hours of data back. So it's just unacceptable. What we allow you to do is, if you have some sort of failure within this 2 weeks, so there's an event, we can rewind it within like 10 seconds before the event happens. Usually what happens is managers and people are happy to be 10 seconds or so behind what just happened if that gets them back up and operational within just a few minutes. Okay. We continue to add features. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on these, but we're going to allow you to pull out files for specific VMs from the point-in-time journal as well. So if you need to recover like a database or something, you can do it from that journal now. So I don't want to spend much time on this feature, but just put in mind some of the capabilities that Zerto has that eventually will show up in OO. So I'm going to show you this. This is what it looks like if I'm doing this from the interface. And I'm just selecting the virtual protection group, selecting my point in time that I want to go back to. There's the checkpoints in there every few seconds. And then I start the failover. So this is showing an actual failover because the bottom bar is in red. And here's what happens. So in a recovery, we're going to shut down the source, power up the target. And this can take, like I said, some customers do it for their audit testing. They do it for real. It takes them 30 minutes to have this done. If I'm doing the testing, which is what we'll be doing with OO, is as we see on the left-hand side, the production environment never has any impact. Yet we're running the virtual machines in the target environment. We're able to test them. People are able to log into them in an isolated bubble-type network and verify that everything works. You could run scripts to make sure services or something are working as well. And then if you want to move, which is another way you can use Zerto, is we're going to shut down the source machines and bring them up at the target site. Now, it's generally that quick. It's just how fast can the machines boot at the target site, because with that low RPO within seconds, the data is essentially already there. So we're not having to queue up a bunch of changes that need to be synced across the WAN. And then Zerto has a feature that automatically allows you to fail back if you have a failover event. Typically what happens is you want to come back to the source side eventually, and then Zerto remembers the locations, the host, the storage, the network settings, and you can just check a box and it'll go, as soon as these sites reconnect, I'll start reverse replicating it, and you'll be able to fail it back as soon as the delta sync happens between the source and the target. So that's Zerto. So let's move on to what we can do together. I do like to mention this cloud continuity platform. This is sort of a concept that Zerto has of explaining the idea of how Zerto intends to federate all of this, to where you're using us, and via OO you'll be using us through APIs to do a lot of things across a lot of different platforms. Okay, so let's talk about specifically what's in the content package. Then I'm going to look at questions. Then I'll show you the demo. All right. So what we're doing here in this content package is we're automating that failover test that I just showed. And so here's what the flow looks like. So OO is going to connect to the Zerto Virtual Manager via the Zerto API. We're going to get the VPG information. So that virtual protection group that I showed you, it's going to get that information of here's all the VMs in it. Here's everything I need to know about the VPG. And then we're going to choose the latest checkpoint in the journal. Now, it has the history of all the checkpoints, but what this test is going to use is the latest. And then we're going to start the failover test. It's going to wait till the failover test is complete. We have integrated a placeholder in this that allows you, if you want to automate checking services, if you want to automate checking databases or something via subflows or other flows, you can add them in here. And so we're going to accommodate that, and that's going to be part of our failover test wait. So we're going to be waiting on those things to finish as well. And then once that's done, we'll complete the test, and then we'll send an email to whatever end user target you would like, and it gives them a link to the report that I was showing you, that detailed report showing that it was successful or failed. But I mean, that's in a way a success, because now you know that they've got to do something to make it work. So this is all automated. So imagine what you could do on schedule is completely automate that whole failover testing, including flows and subflows of checking things inside of VMs, because Zerto's not going to do that. It doesn't know anything about the applications that important to you. You can subflow or flow the operations that an end user would be testing. So then when it's done, the OO is going to complete the test, and it's going to completely reset them. So that's really it. So now I'm going to pop out of this screen. I'm going to go to let's go to the questions. All right. Okay, so I'm going to make this bigger so I can see the questions. Okay, how does it compare versus double take? So double take, think of it this way. Double take is going to be up in the VM. There's impact to the VM, right? So there's an agent in there and it's doing agent-based replication. Zerto's below all that. So we're completely agnostic below and above us. We're at the hypervisor layer. So hopefully that answers your question. We have no agents inside of those VMs. We have no agents on the host. So that's the reason why we can say we're absolutely non-disruptive to your production environment. When you're doing failover testing, the production environment doesn't even know it. When you're doing the install, the production environment doesn't even know it. In fact, the way that normally happens is people that proof of concept Zerto, oftentimes the only change between proof of concept and production is they change the trial license key out for production because they've got it installed. And why would they change it after it's up in operation and working? So VRA is the virtual replication appliance. Thank you, Julie. And there is one per host. And the reason why we do one per host is because we don't want to get into an orphan situation. So if you can imagine, DRS is moving things around between hosts, and each of those VRAs are responsible for their the VMs on that host replication. You can imagine you could orphan it, and then that VM wouldn't have a way to replicate. All right. Software upgrade and patches, do they impact Zerto functionality? So interesting as upgradability and supportability. This is where Zerto really separates themselves from other solutions. Because as we see, there was one mentioned above, that's actually a competitor. Those upgrades impact the VMs to some degree. There's something running on that VM. It's an agent. It has to be upgraded. So whether it's a lot or a little, it's still an impact. If I'm using hardware-based replication, there's definitely an impact between it and the orchestration component. And so if there's version upgrades or firmware upgrades, those things all matter. With the Zerto upgrade, you are containing the upgrade to just Zerto, because remember, the Zerto Virtual Manager is a service running on a dedicated Windows server. So it's only impacting that server when I do the upgrade. You check a couple of boxes. You actually check all the VRAs that you want to upgrade, and those will upgrade systematically. We also have the capability for, and I'll tell you how this came up, was with our cloud service providers. When you're hosting thousands of VMs, protecting them, an upgrade to the VRA is an important event, right? So what we allow you to do is it will do like what you would really hope you could do, is redirect the traffic to another host in the cluster to where the VMs are protected, and then you can go into maintenance mode and do your upgrades. So we've accommodated that, is the point there. All right. Yeah, so any customers use Zerto to cloud providers? Absolutely. So this is part of both a cloud service provider managed, so someone that does all the management as well, but also public cloud. And the first step into public cloud, of course, is with AWS, and that's what Zerto is supporting, the first public cloud, and people are absolutely using us to migrate to different platforms. Now, interestingly enough, Zerto is partners with a lot of storage providers. And so if you think about that, it's almost counterintuitive till you think about what really is happening. The storage provider oftentimes can replace the production environment, but it's a hard sell to get the DR side sold as well with replication. So they just throw Zerto in there. And then you can use anything at your target site or source site, because we'll replicate between them because we're completely agnostic to it. So that is definitely something we see all the time. So whenever your use case is going between completely dissimilar platforms, Zerto is definitely in the mix, and even going between the same platforms, because one of the things we do with this whole cloud continuity platform concept is to essentially future-proof you from whatever the decision comes up. We have customers, and we have partners talking about their customers that said 18 months ago, we would go in and ask them about, are you going to go to cloud? And they would get absolutely not. Those same customers today, either at the C level or the management level, are all saying, yeah, we need to have a cloud strategy, or we have a cloud strategy. And so now, those being Zerto customers, they have options. They don't have to re-architect their underlying platforms. Okay, so any other questions here for a second, then I'm going to get into the demo. All right, so let's move on to the demo. So the first thing I want to show you here is just the Zerto infrastructure. So as we saw in the architecture, we have a couple sites. So here's site 1, and this is got 4 virtual protection groups protected, and this little heat map shows you that. And I'll talk a little bit more about what they are, what they mean. But in a sense, it should be intuitive in normal UI design. Green's good, and yellow is look at it, and red is you got a problem. So here we have yellow on this one, and I'm going to look at this, and I see an active alert over to the right, and it says, hey, it's been over 6 months since you've tested this VPG. Your SLA for this VPG was 6 months. So all it's telling me is I need to test this. And this is also, I can put in an OO, and this will take care of it, right? So now I'm going to go back over to site 2, and I see this same message. And why is that? Because we're a disaster recovery product. So I should be seeing the same alert for that same virtual protection group at the target site as well, because think of it. In the case of a disaster, that source site's gone. And I'm working this from the target site. So I need the same information at that target site. If, for those paying very close attention, I have 5 VPGs protected in the second site. That's because if I look at my site configuration, I'm going to site 1, but I'm also going to AWS. So I wanted to show you this because it's very important for you thinking about how you could orchestrate things. Because now you're not confined to just one site to another site. That was why I showed you the globe with all those connections, is you can start thinking about, if I needed to evacuate this multiple solutions, maybe one's Hyper-V, maybe one's VMware, maybe one's a managed service provider, and maybe one's public, through one operation, I could do that, right? Because with Zerto's part, all the VMs are going to go to the target locations that you want. But from an OO standpoint, with flows, subflows, and all that, you could orchestrate the rest of the physical and the network and the firewalls and all those changes as well. So now we're talking about something that is powerful, and we can move things around. So now, what I want to show you now is let's run a failover test just in Zerto, then we'll show you to you in OO. Okay, so I'm just going to click failover, so the red arrow here, and there's a slider that you see is down at test, but if I slid it up to live, then that bar is going to turn red. So let's go ahead and test this virtual protection group. So this is a listing of all the virtual protection groups, and the little number out beside it means these are the number of VMs. And that's one of the most important distinctions of how Zerto compares against other products as well. Is, remember, this is done by virtual protection group. So if I had 10 VMs, 20 VMs in this, we are orchestrating all of them, not just a single one. So now you go from a onesie, twosie sort of backup scenario into, this is DR, data protection, data mobility. And that's the very important distinction, that all this orchestration is done with multiple virtual machines in groups. They can boot in whatever order I want them to. I can change their IP addresses. I can do a lot of powerful things. Remember, I can reverse protect them as soon as it lands at the target site and I have connection by checking a box and it goes back. So here's the checkpoints. On this one, I think this is a 4-hour journal. So I could go back to